Can you believe that a single, rusty iron key could weigh more than the entire sky? My husband, Arthur, carried that key in his pocket for 15 long years. He took it to work, he took it to bed, he even hung it right on the bathroom door while he washed. He guarded it like he was guarding his own life. For all those 15 years, I lived with a jealousy that ate me alive. I was convinced that behind the locked door of that 5th bedroom lay proof of an affair, another woman, or some dirty little secret. But my dear, I was wrong. Completely wrong. The day I finally put that key in the lock with trembling hands and opened that door, what I saw made me fall to my knees on the dusty floor. I didn't cry because of betrayal. I cried because of a pain so beautiful that I should have known about it sooner. Before I reveal the secret that has brought tears to the eyes of millions, I am so curious to know where in this big wide world you are listening from. Please leave the name of your city or state in the comments below. It always warms my heart to know my grandchildren are tuning in from everywhere. Now, pull up a chair and let Grandma Genevieve tell you the story of The Secret of the 5th Bedroom. I was born in 1943. Back then, honey, life was very different from what it is today. Very different indeed. There was no television, no telephone, none of these modern things. We had fun with what we had. We played in the barnyard, chased after chickens, swam in the creek, helped mother make apple butter in the big kettle. It was a hard life, but it was a simple life. We didn't know anything else, so we didn't complain. I grew up knowing that my destiny was to marry and take care of a family. It was like that for every woman back then. We didn't study much, no. I went up to 8th grade and then stopped. My father used to say that a woman didn't need much book learning. She needed to know how to read, write her name, do sums, and that was it. The rest we learned at home. We learned to cook, to sew, to embroider, to take care of children, to be a good wife. That was what mattered. I won't lie to you. I dreamed of marriage. Every young lady dreamed of it. We would imagine what the husband would be like, what the house would be like, how many children we would have. It was our princess dream, you know. Only it was a different dream. It wasn't of a castle and carriage. It was of a simple little house, a hard-working man, a united family. That was what we wanted. And it was in 1960 that I met Arthur. Arthur Miller. A strong name, right? Back then, names were solid like that. Nowadays it's all trendy names. But in the old days, parents liked to give these traditional names from the Bible or important people. Arthur was a man of 31. I was 17. He was a widower. His first wife had died a few years earlier, but nobody spoke much about it. It was a forbidden subject, you know? People commented in hushed tones, whispered, but never in front of him. It wasn't just the whispers, honey. It was the eyes. Whenever I went into town to buy flour or fabric, I felt the women looking at me. They would stop talking when I walked into the general store. They looked at me with a mix of pity and judgment, like I was trying to fill shoes that were too big for me, or like I was trespassing on sacred ground. I felt like I was walking through a spider web that I couldn't see, but could feel sticking to my skin. I wanted to scream, "What do you know that I don't?" But I held my head high and pretended I didn't notice. But inside, I felt like an intruder in my own life. And I, since I was young and wasn't from the exact same area as him, knew almost nothing about his life before meeting me. He appeared in my town because he had come to buy some livestock. Arthur was a man of means. He wasn't truly rich, but he had more than most. He had a good farm, with cattle, with cornfields, with a big house. And he was looking for a wife, a woman to take care of his home, to build a future with, because he was alone. And a man back then didn't stay alone for long. It wasn't looked upon well. We met at the county fair. I was with my sisters watching the square dancing when he saw me. I remember to this day the way he looked at me. It was a serious, deep look, as if he were studying me. It wasn't the look of a man in love, no. It was the look of someone who was evaluating, who was thinking. I thought it was strange at the time, but I didn't pay it much mind. He came to speak with my father the next day. He arrived at our house, all dressed up, hat in hand, and asked permission to court me. My father was surprised. A man of means, a farm owner, wanting to marry his daughter. It was an honor. It was a chance for a better life for me. My father accepted on the spot, and that's how our courtship began, if you can even call that courting. We saw each other once a week, always with my mother or my older sister nearby, watching. Arthur was a man of few words. He wasn't one of those who made declarations of love, speaking pretty things. He was quiet, reserved. Sometimes we would sit on the porch for half an hour, and he would say almost nothing. Just sat there, looking at the horizon, thinking about who knows what. I confess that sometimes I asked myself if he really liked me, because he didn't show it much, you know? He wasn't affectionate, wasn't one to give compliments, but my mother said that's just how it was, that men weren't ones to talk about feelings, that the important thing was for him to be hardworking, honest, and a good provider. And that Arthur was. There was no doubt. After 6 months of courting, he asked for my hand in marriage. He came to speak with my father again, this time with a simple gold ring. My father cried with emotion. His daughter was going to marry well, was going to have a good life, was going to live in a big house. It was everything he wanted for me. And so, on the 12th of June, 1962, I married Arthur Miller. I was 19 years old. He was 33. It was a beautiful summer day, with a blue sky and the sun shining. I was wearing a white dress that my mother sewed with her own hands. It wasn't anything luxurious, but to me, it was the most beautiful dress in the world. I felt like a princess. The ceremony was in the little church in the town center. There were few people, just family and some close friends. Afterward, there was a lunch at my parents' house, with fried chicken, mashed potatoes and gravy, green beans, fluffy biscuits, farm food, simple folks' food. But it was a beautiful party. Everyone was happy. I was happy. When the party ended, I said goodbye to my parents. My mother hugged me tight and cried on my shoulder. She told me to be a good wife, to obey my husband, to never give cause for shame. And I promised I would. I promised I would make him happy. Arthur took me to his farm in an old pickup truck, one of those that made a lot of noise and let out a lot of smoke. The trip took almost 2 hours because the road was dirt and full of potholes. I went the whole way in silence, looking out the window, thinking about my new life. I was nervous. I was anxious. I was scared too, I won't lie, because I knew almost nothing about that man who was now my husband. When we arrived at the farm, it was already getting dark, and that was when I saw the house for the first time. My dear, I had never seen such a big house. It was an old farmhouse, one of those with a wide porch in front, with wooden windows, with a shingle roof. There was a big garden at the entrance, with rose bushes and jasmine, and there was a white fence all around, well kept. Arthur got out of the truck and came to open the door for me. He gave me his hand and helped me down. Then he stopped in front of the house, looked at me, and said, "This is your home now, Genevieve. Take good care of it." I entered the house and was amazed. There was a big living room with a velvet sofa. There was a huge kitchen with a wood-burning stove. There was a dining room with a solid wood table. There was a backyard with an orchard and a vegetable garden. And there were 5 bedrooms. 5 bedrooms. Honey, I had never lived in a house with more than 2 bedrooms, and now I had 5. Arthur showed me the house slowly. "This here is our room," he said, pointing to the biggest one. I looked and saw a double bed with a quilted spread, a dark wood wardrobe, a vanity with a mirror. It was beautiful. It was more than I dreamed of. Then he showed me the other rooms. "This one here can be for the children when we have them," he said. I smiled, imagining our children running through that house. "This other one is for guests, for when your family comes to visit. And this one here is a sewing room, if you want." I counted them in my head. Master bedroom, children's room, guest room, sewing room. That was 4. But the house had 5. I had seen from the outside that there was one more window, one more door in the hallway. "And the last room?" I asked. "What's in there?" Arthur stopped. He stayed silent for a moment that seemed to last an eternity. His face changed, became more serious, more closed off. His eyes darkened, and he said with a voice I had never heard before, a hard voice, a voice that accepted no questioning. "That room stays closed. You don't need to enter there, ever." It's chilling how quickly a dream home can feel like a prison with just one sentence. You have to wonder, what kind of secret is so heavy that it requires such a harsh warning on a wedding night? Let's see how long Genevieve can live with that closed door. I felt a chill down my spine, an icy shiver that went from my back down to my feet. I didn't understand why a room would stay closed, what was in there that I couldn't see. But I didn't ask anything. I was a young girl, raised to obey. My mother had taught me that a woman didn't question her husband. A woman accepted, a woman stayed quiet, a woman obeyed. That's how it worked. That's how it had to be. So I just nodded and said, "Okay." And that is how my marriage began. With a mystery, with a closed door, with a secret that I didn't know what it was, but that I felt would change my life forever. That first night, lying in bed next to Arthur, I stayed awake for hours. I heard the crickets singing outside. I heard the wind beating against the windows. I heard the heavy breathing of my husband who was already sleeping, and I kept thinking about that room. The fifth room. The forbidden room. What could be in there? Why didn't he want me to enter? What was he hiding? I tried to get it out of my head. I tried to convince myself that it was nothing important, that everyone has their secrets, that I should respect my husband's privacy. But it was no use. The more I tried to forget, the more I thought about it. In the following days, I began to observe Arthur more closely. I saw that he always put his hand in his trousers pocket, as if he were checking something, and I realized it was a key. An old iron key with a fancy handle, the key to the fifth room. He took that key everywhere. When he went to work in the fields, the key was in his pocket. When he went to sleep, the key stayed under the pillow. When he went to take a bath, the key hung on a nail on the inside of the bathroom door. He never, at any moment, let that key away from him. I started to get more and more curious, and more worried too. You see, it wasn't just a piece of iron, children. To Arthur, that key was the only thing holding his world together. He held on to it so tight, I truly believe he thought that if he ever let go, he would just fade away into that painful past forever. What was so important that it needed to be kept under lock and key? What was so secret that not even his wife could know? I tried to ask once. It was about 2 months after the wedding. We were eating dinner in silence, as always, when I worked up the courage and said, "Arthur, that room at the back, do you think one day you'll tell me what's in there?" He dropped his fork onto the plate. The noise echoed through the empty kitchen. He looked at me with those dark eyes, those eyes that seemed to hold all the sadness in the world, and said, "I already told you, Genevieve, that room doesn't exist for you. Don't ask me about that anymore." I felt my heart tighten. It wasn't just what he said, it was how he said it, with so much pain in his voice, with so much weight, as if every word cost a piece of his soul. I didn't ask again, never again. I know, honey. Many of you listening right now are probably asking, "Grandma, why didn't you just kick that door down? Why did you live like a ghost in your own house for 15 years? But you have to understand, back then, us women were raised to believe that silence was a virtue. And sometimes, my dears, we stay silent, not out of fear, but because we can feel a pain in the other person so deep that words just seem useless. For 15 years I lived in that house, passed by that hallway every day, looked at that closed door, and never brought up the subject again. But the mystery remained there, growing, feeding on my silence, feeding on my doubts, feeding on the fear I had of discovering the truth. Because deep down, my dear, I was afraid. I was very afraid of what could be in that room, of what my husband could be hiding from me, of the secret he guarded with such devotion, and I was right to be afraid. Because when I finally found out, nothing was ever the same. The first months of marriage were about adaptation. I was learning to be the mistress of that big house, learning my husband's ways, learning to live far from my family. It was all very new to me. I had come from a cramped little house, where I lived with my parents and my 6 siblings. And now I was in a big farmhouse with 5 bedrooms, where only the 2 of us lived. The silence was different. The loneliness was different. Everything was different. Arthur left early to work in the crops, and only returned when the sun was setting. I stayed all day alone in that huge house. I cooked, I cleaned, I washed clothes in the wash tub, I tended the vegetable garden, I fed the chickens. There was a lady named Dorothy, who came 3 times a week to help me with the heavier chores. But other than that, it was just me. Me and that house, me and that silence, me and that locked door at the end of the hall. In the beginning, I tried not to think about that room. I occupied myself with chores. I sang while I worked. I read my Bible every afternoon to distract my mind, but it was impossible to ignore completely. Every time I passed the hallway, my eyes would stop at that door. It was as if it called to me, as if it wanted to tell me something, as if it held a secret that was desperate to get out. The door was dark wood, just like the other doors in the house, but there was something different about it. Maybe it was the reinforced lock, maybe it was the fact that it had never been opened in my presence. Maybe it was just my imagination, fed by curiosity and fear. But that door seemed different, seemed heavier, seemed to carry a weight that the others didn't. I remember one time, it must have been about 3 months after the wedding. I was cleaning the hallway and stopped in front of that door. I stood there, looking, as if I expected it to open by itself. And then I did something I had never done before. I placed my hand on the doorknob. The metal was cold, too cold for a hot summer day. I felt a shiver go up my arm and take over my whole body. My heart raced, my breathing became heavy, and for a moment, just for a moment, I thought about turning that knob, about forcing that door, about discovering what was on the other side. But then I heard the sound of Arthur's truck arriving, and I snatched my hand away so fast I almost stumbled backward. I ran to the other side of the house with my heart still racing, with my hands still trembling. When my husband entered, I was in the kitchen pretending to stir an empty pot. He looked at me strangely, but said nothing. He never said anything. After that day, I avoided getting close to that door. I would pass through the hallway, always in a hurry, always with my eyes on the floor, as if I were afraid the door would sense my curiosity. It seems crazy, I know, but that's how I felt. As if that room knew my thoughts, as if it were watching me. Time passed. A year, 2 years, 3 years. And I got used to married life. I got used to Arthur's quiet way, to the long silences during meals, to the nights when he slept with his back to me without saying a word. I learned to live with little affection, with little demonstration of care, because that's how he was, and I had to accept it. But there was one thing I never got used to. One thing that disturbed me more and more as the years went by. It was the nights when Arthur would get out of bed and leave the room. It happened 1 or 2 times a month, always in the middle of the night, when he thought I was sleeping. I felt the mattress move when he got up. I heard his steps on the wooden floor, slow, careful, trying not to make noise. And then I heard the door of our room open and close, very gently. The first time this happened, I was terrified. I thought there was a burglar in the house that Arthur had gone to check on. I lay in bed with my heart in my throat, waiting for him to come back. And he came back about 20 minutes later, lay down beside me, sighed deeply, and fell asleep again. The next day, I asked if anything had happened during the night. He looked at me confused and said no, that he had slept all night. I thought it was strange, but didn't insist. I thought maybe I had dreamed it. But it wasn't a dream, because it happened again and again and again. And then I started to pay attention. I started pretending I was asleep when I felt him get up. I controlled my breathing to sound heavy and regular. I stayed motionless, with my eyes closed while he left the room. And then, very slowly, I opened my eyes and listened. His steps went down the hallway, always in the same direction, always to the same place. And then I heard the sound of a key turning in a lock, and a door opening and steps entering a room, and the door closing again. It was the 5th room. My husband got up in the middle of the night to enter that locked room and stayed in there for 20, 30 minutes, sometimes up to an hour alone, in the dark, while I pretended to sleep on the other side of the house. What did he do in there? What was in that place that he needed to visit in the middle of the night, hidden from his own wife? I started creating theories in my head, each one worse than the last. The first thing I thought was money, that maybe he kept money in there, a hidden fortune that he didn't want anyone to know about. But that didn't make sense. Why visit money at dawn? Why stay in there for so long? Then I thought about stolen goods, that maybe Arthur had some past I didn't know about, that maybe he kept objects that weren't his, but that didn't make sense either. My husband was a hard-working, honest man, respected in the region. Everyone spoke well of him. He didn't fit the idea of a criminal. And then came the thought that tormented me the most. The thought I tried to push away, but that always came back stronger, more insistent. What if it was another woman? I know it sounds crazy. How could there be another woman inside a locked room? But one's mind works in a strange way when you are afraid, when you are insecure. I started to imagine that maybe he had a lover, that maybe she entered hidden through the bedroom window during the night, that maybe the two of them met there while I slept on the other side of the wall. It was an absurd idea. I knew it was absurd, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. And the more I thought, the more I felt anger and jealousy and a pain in my chest that I couldn't explain. Have you ever been jealous of a door, my dears? It sounds foolish, I know, but night after night I lay there, comparing myself to whatever was hiding behind that cold wood, feeling like an intruder in my own home. Oh, it hurts more than you can imagine. I started to hate the mirror. I would look at my reflection and search for flaws. Was I not pretty enough? Was my cooking not tasty enough? Was my conversation too boring? I began to compete with a ghost, comparing myself to an imaginary woman who I was convinced was better than me in every way. It eats away at your soul, believing you are second best in your own home. I became small, quiet, trying to shrink myself so I wouldn't take up space, hoping that maybe if I was perfect, he would finally look at me the way he looked at that closed door. There was one night, it must have been 1965, 3 years after the wedding, that I decided to follow Arthur. When he got out of bed, I waited a few minutes and got up too. With my heart beating fast, I went to our bedroom door and opened a crack just small enough to see the hallway. And I saw my husband standing in front of that door, the door to the 5th room. He was with his back to me, with his shoulders hunched, with his head down, and he was standing there, just standing, without moving. It seemed like he was building up the courage to enter, or maybe asking for permission, or maybe praying. I don't know. After a time that seemed eternal, he put the key in the lock and opened the door. And before entering, he lit a candle that was in a holder outside. The light flickered in the hallway, making shadows dance on the walls, and he entered the room and closed the door behind him. I stayed there, peeking through the crack, waiting. I don't know how much time passed, maybe 15 minutes, maybe half an hour. Time seems different when we are afraid. It seems to drag, to take longer than it should. And then I heard something that made me freeze. A crying sound. It was a low, muffled cry coming from inside that room. A man's cry. A cry of pain, of longing, of despair. It was Arthur crying. My husband, that hard, quiet man who never showed any emotion, was crying alone in the dark inside a locked room in the middle of the night. I can't explain what I felt in that moment. It was a mix of relief and anguish. Relief because it wasn't another woman. Anguish because I didn't understand what was happening. What was in that room that made my husband cry like that? What pain was that which he carried hidden, that he couldn't share even with his own wife? This is the moment everything changes for Genevieve. It's not another woman. It's a grief so deep he has to lock it away. Stay with us, because the reason for those tears is more heartbreaking than you can imagine. I felt like a stranger in my own marriage, honey. Can you imagine that pain? Lying in the dark, just inches away from the man you vowed to love, yet feeling like there was an ocean between you. I wanted to hold him, to tell him that whatever it was, we could carry it together. But the lock on that door was also a lock on his heart. And every sob I heard through the wall felt like he was choosing his secret over me, over us. It made me feel small. It made me feel invisible. I went back to our room before he came out of there. I lay in bed, pulled the sheet up to my chin, and stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep. When he came back and lay down beside me, I pretended I was asleep, and he sighed that heavy sigh of always and fell asleep. The next morning, I looked at him at the breakfast table and tried to find some sign of what had happened during the night. But he was the same as always, face closed, eyes tired, the expression of someone carrying a weight that cannot be shared. He ate in silence, took his hat, and went out to work as if nothing had happened, as if the night before was just another ordinary night. And I stayed there alone again, with more questions than answers. The years passed, and the routine established itself. 1966, 67, 68. Life followed its normal course on the farm. The cattle grew, the crops prospered, the house remained standing, and I continued being Arthur's wife. The woman who took care of the house, who cooked the food, who washed the clothes, the woman who slept every night beside a man who kept a secret. All this time, we couldn't have children. I wanted to be a mother very much. It was my biggest dream. Every time I saw a child in town, my heart ached. Every time an acquaintance announced she was pregnant, I felt an envy that shamed me. But the children didn't come. Month after month, year after year, nothing. Arthur never touched on the subject, never asked why we didn't have children, never suggested we see a doctor, never showed sadness or disappointment. It was as if he didn't care, as if the idea of having children made no difference to him. This hurt me. It hurt me a lot because I thought he didn't want to have a family with me, that he had married just to have someone to take care of his house, that I was more of a maid than a wife. I tried to talk to him once. It was on a Sunday afternoon. We were sitting on the porch watching the sun set. I worked up the courage and said, "Arthur, didn't you want to have children?" He remained silent for a long time, so long that I thought he wasn't going to answer. But then he said with a low, hoarse voice, "I did, Genevieve. I once did." I felt my blood run cold. What did he mean by that? He had children? Where were they? Why did I never know? I opened my mouth to ask, but he got up and went into the house, leaving me alone on the porch. I should have run after him right then and there. I should have wrapped my arms around those trembling shoulders. But fear froze my feet to the floor. Sometimes, we miss the chance to truly understand each other simply because we're terrified that the answer might hurt us even more than the silence does. And I stayed there with my heart racing, with 1,000 questions in my head, understanding nothing. I already had them. Those words kept hammering in my mind for days, weeks, months. What had happened? His first wife had children. Where were these children? Why did no one ever mention this? I tried to investigate. When I went to town to do shopping, I tried to strike up conversations with the older folks, the ones who might know something about Arthur's past. But nobody spoke. People looked away, changed the subject, pretended they hadn't heard my question. It was as if there existed a silent agreement not to speak about it, to keep buried whatever had happened. And I was becoming more and more obsessed, more and more consumed by that mystery. I thought about it morning, noon, and night. Thought about it when I was cooking, when I was washing clothes, when I was praying. Thought about it when I was lying in bed, listening to my husband's steps, going to the 5th room, listening to the muffled crying coming from there. There was a time I thought about leaving, about going back to my parents' house, about asking for an annulment of the marriage, about restarting my life far from that house, from that man, from that secret. But I didn't have the courage. A separated woman back then was looked down upon, was rejected, was a cause for shame. I was going to shame my whole family, was going to become the subject of town gossip, was going to spend the rest of my life hearing whispers behind my back. So I stayed. I stayed because I had no choice. I stayed because it was my duty. I stayed because, despite everything, I still had hope of one day understanding, of one day discovering, of one day finally knowing what was in that room that my husband protected with such care. And life went on. 1,970 arrived. I was already 27 years old, was already a grown woman, had been married almost 8 years, and nothing had changed. Arthur remained the same, quiet, reserved, mysterious man. And that door remained closed, always closed. But there was one thing that was different, and I accepted it because there was no way to force him. My husband was like that. Decided things alone. Didn't listen to a woman's advice. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just tiredness. I knew there was something wrong, something that was consuming him from the inside slowly, like a fire that burns slow but never goes out. It was the weight of that secret. It was the pain he carried alone. It was that locked room that held something so heavy it was dragging my husband down with it. And I stood watching, without being able to do anything, without being able to help, without being able to understand, until the day everything changed, until the day the door finally opened. The late 60 seconds turned into the 70 seconds, bringing changes I didn't expect. The world outside was transforming. I heard on the radio about things that seemed from another planet. Men walking on the moon, distant wars, protests, new music, different customs. But there inside that farm, inside that 5-bedroom house, time seemed to have stopped. It was as if we lived in a bubble, separated from the rest of the world, trapped in a routine that repeated day after day, month after month, year after year. I had already learned to live with the mystery. had already learned to pass by that hallway without looking at the locked door, had already learned to pretend I didn't hear my husband's steps at dawn, that I didn't listen to the muffled crying coming from that room. I had built a wall inside me, a wall that separated curiosity from acceptance, and I lived on the side of acceptance. It was easier that way. It was less painful, but what I couldn't ignore was the change in Arthur. My husband was wasting away in front of me. It wasn't a sudden thing. It wasn't a sickness that knocked him down all at once. It was a slow, gradual process, like a candle burning down until nothing is left. Every day he seemed a little more tired than the last. Every week he seemed a little thinner. Every month he seemed to have aged a whole year. In 1972, he started having strong headaches. Headaches that made him press his temples with his hands, close his eyes tight, breathe deep, trying to endure. I begged him to go to the doctor, but he refused. Said it was a passing thing, that it would get better on its own, that a man didn't go running after a doctor because of a headache. I got so angry when he talked like that, so angry at this stubbornness, at this arrogance of thinking he could solve everything alone. But I couldn't do anything. I was just the wife. The wife's opinion carried no weight in the husband's decisions. That's how it worked. That's how it had to be. In 73, besides the headaches, came the dizziness. Arthur was working in the fields when suddenly the world spun and he fell to the ground. The farm hands brought him to the house, carried. I almost died of fright when I saw my husband being brought in the arms of two men, pale as wax, with his eyes rolled back. This time I didn't ask. I ordered one of the farmhands to go to town to fetch Dr. Henry, the only doctor in the region. Arthur tried to protest, tried to say it wasn't needed, but I didn't let him. For the first time in over 10 years of marriage, I disobeyed my husband, and I don't regret it. Dr. Henry was an old man, with a white beard and thick glasses, who had been attending the whole region for decades. He examined Arthur carefully, measured his pressure, listened to his heart, asked questions about the symptoms, and then called me to a corner of the room, far from my husband's ears. "Mrs. Miller," he said softly, "your husband has very high blood pressure, dangerously high. If he doesn't take care, doesn't change his habits, doesn't take the medicine, this could end very badly." "Very badly how, doctor?" I asked, already feeling the fear tighten my chest. "He could have a stroke, Genevieve. And if that happens, the consequences can be severe, very severe." I felt my legs go weak. I had to lean on the wall so as not to fall. Stroke. I knew that word. I knew what it meant. I had seen people in town who had had a stroke. Some were left with a twisted face. Some lost movement on one side of the body. Some were bedridden forever. Some died. The doctor prescribed some medicines and recommended rest. Said for Arthur to stop working so much, eat less salt, avoid worries. My husband listened to everything in silence, with that closed expression of always. When the doctor left, he got up from the bed and said he was going back to work. I begged. I begged on my knees, with tears in my eyes, for him to rest, for him to take care, for him to think about his own health. But he didn't listen. Said he had obligations, that the farm couldn't stop, that he wasn't going to lie around while there was work to be done. And he left me there crying alone in the room. That day, I realized something. Arthur wasn't just ignoring his own health. He was destroying himself on purpose. It was as if he didn't want to take care, as if he didn't care about living, as if that pain he carried inside was so big that death seemed like a relief. And that realization hurt me more than anything else, because I understood that my husband was suffering in a way I couldn't reach, in a way I couldn't help. He was drowning right in front of me, and I couldn't do anything but watch. The following years were difficult. 74, 75, 76. I watched my husband fading away slowly, like a lantern running out of kerosene. He still worked, still took care of the farm, still did everything he always did, but with less strength, with less will, with less life. The nightly trips to the fifth room became more frequent. Before it was once or twice a month, now it was almost every week, sometimes 2, 3 times in the same week. And the crying also became longer, more intense, more desperate. But every time I worked up the courage, I looked at him and saw a man so broken, so fragile, so close to shattering completely, that I gave up. I was afraid that a confrontation would be the last straw, that it would push him over the edge into the abyss. So I continued in silence. continued being the patient, understanding wife, who didn't ask, who didn't question, who didn't demand, continued waiting, waiting for one day him to open up, for one day him to trust me, for one day him to tell me what was hidden in that room. But the day that came wasn't how I expected. It wasn't a calm conversation on the porch. It wasn't a confession in the middle of the night. It was a tragedy. It was March of 1977. The summer was ending, but the heat still punished. It was an unbearable humidity, the kind that makes clothes stick to the body and the head feel heavy. Arthur had gone out early to resolve some things in town. I stayed home doing my usual chores. Around 3 inches the afternoon, I heard the sound of a car arriving. I thought it was strange, because Arthur had said he would only return at night. I went to the window and saw it wasn't his car. It was the pickup truck of Frank, a neighbor who had landed on the other side of the creek. Frank got out of the truck with an expression I will never forget, an expression of someone about to deliver terrible news. He took off his hat, looked at the ground, and said, "Ma'am, you need to come with me. Mr. Miller took ill in town. He's at Dr. Henry's office. It looks serious." I don't remember clearly what happened next. I know I got into the pickup. I know we went to town. I know I prayed the whole way, repeating prayer after prayer, asking God not to take my husband yet. Not now, not like this. When I arrived at the office, I found Arthur lying on a gurney with the right side of his body paralyzed. His face was twisted, one side drooping, without movement. His eyes were open, but seemed lost, confused, as if he didn't understand where he was. Dr. Henry came to speak to me, said it was what he feared, a stroke. His pressure had gone up too much, and something had burst inside his head. He said that Arthur needed a real hospital, and fast. But our town didn't have one. The nearest one was over an hour away, and Dr. Henry didn't know if my husband would survive the journey. I felt the ground disappear from under my feet. It was as if the world had lost gravity, and I was floating without knowing where to go, without knowing what to do. My husband was dying, the man with whom I had lived for 15 years, the man I had learned to love, despite everything, despite the silence, despite the secrets, was dying. We attempted the trip. Frank drove as fast as he could, while I rode in the back seat, holding Arthur's hand, his left hand, the one that still had movement. I squeezed that hand and spoke to him, even without knowing if he could hear me. I said everything was going to be fine, that he was going to recover, that we were going to go back home and continue our life together. But I knew it was a lie. I saw in his face that it was a lie. When we were almost arriving at the hospital in the big city, Arthur squeezed my hand. It was a weak, trembling squeeze, but it was a squeeze. I looked at him and saw he was trying to speak. His mouth moved, but the sound didn't come out right. It was a dragging moan, difficult to understand. I leaned in, put my ear near his mouth, and heard in a whisper that seemed to come from very far away, a word that made me freeze. Room. I pulled my face back and looked into his eyes. Those dark eyes that had always been so mysterious, so closed, were now full of tears, full of fear, full of a pain I had never seen before. He tried to speak again, his mouth moving slowly, every syllable costing an enormous effort, and I heard more words, chopped, broken, but that I managed to piece together. The room, forgive, Genevieve, forgive. There is nothing like the face of death to break a lifetime of silence. Arthur knows he's running out of time to make things right, and Genevieve is about to inherit a burden she never asked for. And then his eyes rolled back and he fainted. I screamed for Frank to drive faster, screamed for Arthur not to give up, screamed for God not to take him yet. And we arrived at the hospital and the doctors came running and took him inside. And I stayed there in the hallway alone, trembling, praying, crying. They were the longest hours of my life. I stayed in that hospital corridor, sitting on a hard plastic chair, staring at the white wall, waiting for news. Every time a door opened, my heart raced. Every time someone in a white coat passed, I stood up, hoping they would come speak to me. But no one came, and time passed, and the anguish only increased. Finally, when it was already late at night, a doctor came looking for me. He said Arthur had survived, but the stroke had been severe, very severe. He was going to need months of recovery, maybe years, and even so, probably would never return to being how he was before. The right side of his body might be compromised forever. Speech might not return completely. Memory might fail. I thanked the doctor, thanked that my husband was alive. That was all that mattered in that moment. He was alive. He still had a chance. Arthur stayed hospitalized for 2 weeks. I spent all that time at the hospital, sleeping in a chair next to his bed, only leaving to eat something quick and run back. I wanted to be there when he woke up. I wanted to be the first thing he saw. And when he finally opened his eyes, days after the stroke, the first thing he did was look at me. And the first thing he tried to say with that crooked mouth that could barely form words was again the same thing. The room. Forgive. I held his hand and said everything was okay, that we were going to resolve everything, that he didn't need to worry. But inside I was consumed by curiosity. What was in that room that was so important? What did he need to ask my forgiveness for so badly? After 2 weeks, the doctors released Arthur to go back home. He was still very debilitated, could barely walk alone, needed help for everything. I hired a lady from town named Dorothy to help me take care of him, because I wasn't going to manage alone. The trip back was silent. Arthur spent the whole way with his eyes closed, his head resting against the window glass. I kept looking at him, trying to understand what was passing through that mind, behind those closed eyes. Was he thinking about the room? Was he regretting all those years of secrecy? When we arrived at the farm, I helped him enter the house, and for the first time in 15 years, I saw Arthur look at that door at the end of the hall in a different way. It wasn't the protective look of always anymore. It was a look of farewell, as if he knew he was never going to be able to enter there again, as if he were saying goodbye. That night, after settling Arthur in bed, I went to the room where we had put his clothes from the hospital, and there, in the pocket of the trousers he was wearing on the day of the stroke, I found the key to the 5th room. I held that key in my hand for a long time. It was cold, heavy, old. The metal was worn from being touched so much, from being carried so much, from being hidden so much. That key had been my husband's best-kept secret for decades, and now it was in my hand. I could open the door. Finally, after 15 years, I could discover what was in there. But I hesitated. I looked back, toward the bedroom door, where Arthur was sleeping a restless sleep from the medicines. He had asked for my forgiveness, had tried to tell me something about that room, but hadn't succeeded. Did I have the right to find out without his permission? Should I wait for him to get better and be able to tell me? And if he didn't get better? And if I never knew the truth? I stayed awake all night, with that key clutched in my hand, thinking, praying, deciding, holding that heavy key. I felt like a common thief. But looking at my husband lying helpless in that bed, I realized I wasn't doing it out of curiosity anymore. I was opening that door to save him. I was doing it to save the last little bit of life left in this cold house. And, when the sun began to rise, painting the sky orange and pink, I made my decision. I was going to open that door. I was going to discover my husband's secret. I was finally going to enter the 5th room, but what I found inside, my dear, changed everything I thought I knew about the man I had married. I waited for the day to brighten completely before getting up from that chair where I had spent the night awake. The key was still in my hand, so tight it had left a mark on my palm. I looked at it again, studying every detail of that piece of iron that had guarded so many secrets for so many years. It was an old key, one of those with a fancy handle, with designs worn by time and use. How many times had Arthur held this same key? How many times had he turned it in that lock? How many nights had he crossed that hallway alone, carrying this key as if he carried the weight of the world? I stood up slowly. My legs were numb from sitting so long. I went to the room where Arthur was sleeping and opened the door very gently, just to see if he was okay. He was there, lying on his back, with the heavy and irregular breathing of someone under the effect of strong medicine. His face was still twisted, the right side drooping, expressionless, but he was alive, was breathing. That was what mattered. I closed the door again and stood in the hallway. The house was in absolute silence. Mrs. Dorothy, the lady I had hired to help, only arrived later. I was alone with that key, alone with that door, alone with the decision I had made. My feet started walking even before I commanded them. It was as if they had a will of their own, as if they knew the way by heart, as if they had waited 15 years for this moment. I walked down the hallway slowly, feeling every wooden board creak under my weight. The morning sun entered through the windows and made streaks of light on the floor. Dust floated in the air, shining like golden glitter. It was a beautiful day outside, a day that didn't match the weight I felt in my chest. When I arrived in front of the door, I stopped. I stood there looking at it, as I had done so many times over those years. But this time it was different. This time I had the key. This time I was going to enter. I raised my hand and touched my fingers to the wood. It was cold. Cold as it had been that day, so many years ago, when I had touched the doorknob for the first time. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, trying to control the heart that beat uncontrollably in my chest. What would I find on the other side? What had Arthur hidden from me for so long? I put the key in the lock. The metal rasped against metal, a sound that echoed through the empty hallway. I turned the key slowly, feeling the resistance of the old lock that hadn't been used in ages. There was a click. The lock gave way. The door was unlocked. I rested my hand on the doorknob. I was trembling so much I could barely hold it. I took one more deep breath, asked God for strength, and pushed the door. It opened with a long, dragging creak, like a moan of pain. A smell of storage invaded my nostrils. Smell of dust, of mold, of stopped time. Smell of a place that stayed closed for years, decades, without fresh air, without sunlight, without life. Walking into that room is like stepping into a time capsule of grief. You can almost feel the silence pressing down on you as the pieces of Arthur's broken heart finally come into view. Can you imagine that smell? It wasn't just dust and old age. It was the smell of grief, thick and heavy in the air. Arthur hadn't just locked a room, he had tried to freeze time itself. He was trying to hold on to the very last happy days he knew before the tragedy struck. At first, I couldn't see anything. The room was dark, the curtains closed, blocking any brightness. I stood in the doorway, waiting for my eyes to get used to the gloom. And little by little, very slowly, the shapes began to appear. The outlines of the furniture were revealing themselves, and what I saw made me lose my breath. It was a child's room. I blinked, thinking I was seeing things wrong, but I wasn't. It was a child's room, a small, cozy room, decorated with all the care and affection a mother and father can have. The walls were painted a light yellow, faded by time, but still visible. There were hand-painted drawings near the ceiling, drawings of birds, of flowers, of butterflies, drawings made with love, made to gladden the eyes of a child. I took a step inside. My feet raised a cloud of dust from the floor. The floorboards creaked loudly, protesting against the invasion after so many years of silence. I walked slowly, looking around, trying to absorb every detail of that place. In the center of the room was a crib of dark wood, crafted, with delicate rails and a lace veil hanging above. The veil was yellowed, covered in dust, torn in some places, but you could see that one day it had been white, immaculate, bought with pride to receive a baby. I approached the crib and looked inside. There was a small mattress covered by a faded flannel sheet, and on top of the sheet was a doll, a rag doll with black yarn hair and a flowered dress. The doll was lying there, as if waiting for its owner to come back to play with it. I felt my legs go weak. I had to lean on the edge of the crib so as not to fall. A child. Arthur had had a child who had slept in this crib, who had played with this doll, who had filled this room with laughter and life. A child I never knew, a child about whom no one ever spoke. I looked around, searching for more clues, more answers. Next to the crib was a small wardrobe, the right size for children's clothes. I opened the doors and found dresses, tiny dresses of simple fabric, handmade. There was a white christening gown, a flowered Sunday dress, an everyday cotton dress, all hanging on wooden hangers, covered in dust, but preserved with care. Under the dresses, on the bottom shelves, were shoes, little leather shoes, so small they fit in the palm of my hand. There were folded socks, hair ribbons, satin bows, everything organized, everything kept, as if the owner were going to return at any moment to use them. I closed the wardrobe and turned to the rest of the room. In a corner was a small rocking chair, child-sized, with an embroidered cushion on the seat. Next to the chair was a low table, and on top of the table were toys, a pile of wooden blocks, a stick horse, a set of tin pots, simple toys, from a simpler time, but that told a story of love and care. The walls had pictures, small pictures, with wooden frames that I hadn't noticed in the dark. And then I saw something that made the hair on my arms stand up. On the wall, next to the window, hung a paper calendar. It wasn't from this year, or last year. It was from 1958. The month was open to March. The days were crossed off with a red pencil up until the 3rd. After that, the days were blank, pristine, empty. Time hadn't just passed in this room. It had frozen. My husband hadn't just locked a door. He had tried to stop the clock, to keep them in that last moment before the tragedy struck. It was a mausoleum of unfinished days. I approached one of them and wiped the dust with my sleeve. And when I saw what it was, my heart stopped. It was a photograph, an old photograph, in black and white, of a little girl. She must have been about 2, 3 years old in the photo. She had dark, curly hair, held back with a light ribbon, big, round eyes that looked straight at the camera with an expression of curiosity. Chubby cheeks, small nose, heart-shaped mouth. She was a beautiful girl, a girl who seemed full of life, full of joy, full of future. I took the picture off the wall and held it with both hands. I stared at that little face for a long time, trying to find resemblances, trying to understand. And I found them. I found them in the eyes. Those big dark eyes were just like Arthur's, exactly the same. It was his daughter. I put the picture back and went to look for more photos, and found them. There were several scattered around the room. Photos of the baby girl sleeping in the crib. Photos of the girl crawling on the floor. Photos of the girl taking her first steps, holding someone's hand out of the frame. Photos of the girl smiling, showing her first little teeth. Photos of the girl in a woman's lap, the woman, Arthur's first wife, Iris. I had never seen a photo of her. No one had ever shown me. But there in that room was a large photo of her with her daughter in her lap. Iris was a beautiful woman, with a soft face and a sweet look. She had her hair tied in a low bun and wore a simple, high-collared dress. She looked at the camera with a small, almost shy smile. And the girl in her lap looked at her mother with an adoration that crossed time, that crossed the photograph, that reached me decades later. I fell to my knees, not because of the dust, but because the weight of the truth finally hit me. All those years, I thought I was fighting a mistress, fighting for his love against another woman, but I was fighting ghosts. I was jealous of a memory. The tears came like a flood, washing away my anger and replacing it with a heartbreak so pure it almost stopped my breath. I wasn't crying for myself anymore. I was crying for a mother who never got to braid her daughter's hair. I was crying for a little girl who never grew up. And mostly, I cried for Arthur. My God, how he must have suffered, to walk past this room every day, knowing his whole world was gathering dust inside. I finally understood that his silence wasn't a rejection of me. It was a prison he had built for himself. I went to the window and opened the curtain. The sunlight entered all at once, illuminating the whole room, revealing every corner, every detail that the darkness had hidden. And that was when I saw the nightstand next to the crib, and, on top of the nightstand, an envelope. I approached slowly, as if afraid the envelope would disappear if I walked too fast. I picked it up carefully. It was an old envelope, of thick paper, yellowed by time. It wasn't sealed. The flap was just tucked inside, as if it had been opened and closed many times over the years. I opened the envelope and took out what was inside. It was a letter, a handwritten letter, in feminine handwriting, neat, in ink that was already fading, and at the top of the letter, a name, Iris. I had to sit on the floor to be able to read. My legs couldn't support me anymore. My hands shook so much the paper rattled, but I read every word of that letter, and every word was like a knife entering my heart. The letter said, "My dear Arthur, if you are reading this, it is because I didn't make it. I tried, my love. I tried with all my strength, but my body didn't hold out, and now I need to go. I know you will be angry. I know you will be sad. I know you will want to come with me. But I ask, my love, I beg, don't do that. Stay. Stay for our Charlotte. She needs you. She needs a father. She needs someone who takes care of her, who protects her, who loves her like I love her. I wanted to have more time, wanted to see our daughter grow, Wanted to see her take her first steps, speak her first words, go to school, get married, have her own children. Wanted to grow old by your side, Arthur. Wanted to spend the rest of my life waking up every morning and seeing your face. But God wanted it differently, and I have to accept. Take care of our girl, my love. Tell her that Mommy loved her more than her own life. Tell her that I will be watching from above every day, taking care of her from afar. Tell her that I will never forget her, never, not even in eternity. And you, Arthur, my husband, my companion, my love, I want you to be happy. I know it will be hard in the beginning, but with time, I want you to find someone who takes care of you, who takes care of Charlotte, who brings joy back to this house. Don't close yourself to the world because of me. Don't condemn yourself to a life of sadness. Live, my love. Live for me, live for us. I will always love you. Wherever I am, I will always love you. With all my heart forever, your Iris. I couldn't finish reading without sobbing. Tears fell on the paper, and I had to move the letter away so as not to smear the ink. It was the letter of a woman who knew she was going to die. A farewell letter. A love letter that crossed decades and reached me. The second wife. The woman who came after. The woman who never knew anything. Reading those words, every ounce of jealousy in my heart vanished like mist in the morning sun. I didn't feel like the unwanted second wife anymore. I felt chosen. Iris had chosen me. She had trusted me to pick up the burden of love she had been forced to set down. Iris had died in childbirth. I understood that from the letter. She must have written it while she was pregnant, preparing for the worst, hoping for the best. But the worst happened, and she was gone and left Arthur alone with a baby daughter to raise. But the girl in the photos wasn't a baby. There were photos of her older, walking, playing, smiling. What had happened? Why was that room intact, as if the child were going to return at any moment? I got up from the floor and looked for more clues. I opened the dresser drawers and found more clothes, more personal objects. And in the back of one of the drawers, I found another envelope. This one was smaller, simpler, and inside was an official paper, a paper with a stamp, with signatures, with block letters. It was a death certificate. Name, Charlotte Miller. Date of birth, the 15th of August, 1954. Date of death, the 3rd of March, 1958. Cause of death, pneumonia. Age, 3 years and 6 months. I let the paper fall to the floor. I couldn't hold it. My hands lost their strength. My body lost its support. My soul lost its way. The girl had died. Arthur's daughter had died at 3.5 years of age, of pneumonia, of a disease that nowadays has a cure, but back then in the country, without resources, without a hospital nearby, killed children. Arthur had lost his wife in childbirth, and less than 4 years later had lost his daughter. Now the full picture comes into focus, and it is tragic. He didn't lock the door to keep Genevieve out, but to keep the memory of the family he lost from fading away completely. He had also been left alone in the world, without anyone, just with this house that was too big, with this room full of memories, with this pain too big to fit in one body alone, and he had locked everything away. Had locked the room, locked the pain, locked the memories, had kept the key in his pocket and had moved on, because that was what he needed to do, because it was the only option he had found another woman, had married again, had tried to rebuild a life, but had never been able to talk about it, had never been able to share this pain, had never been able to open this door for anyone else until now. I stayed in that room for hours, sitting on the floor, surrounded by Charlotte's things, crying a grief that wasn't mine, but that now was also mine. I cried for the girl I never knew, for the mother who died too young, for my husband who suffered in silence for decades. I cried for all the years I spent suspecting, mistrusting, thinking horrible things. I cried with shame. I cried with regret. I cried from a pain that has no name. When I finally managed to get up, the sun was already high in the sky. It must have been almost noon. I heard noises in the house and realized that Mrs. Dorothy had arrived. She must have been looking for me, wondering where I had gotten to. I wiped my face with the back of my hands, trying to disguise the tears, but it was impossible. My eyes were swollen, my nose was red, my blouse was all stained. Anyone who looked at me would know I had cried. I left the room and closed the door behind me, but I didn't lock it. Never again would that door stay locked. Never again would that secret stay hidden. Mrs. Dorothy found me in the hallway, and her eyes went wide when she saw me, asked what had happened, if I was okay, if I needed anything. I said I was fine, that it was just tiredness, that it had been a difficult night. She didn't believe me, I saw by her expression. But she didn't insist. She was a discreet woman who knew her place. I went to the room where Arthur was. He had woken up, was lying with eyes open, looking at the ceiling, lost in thoughts that I now began to understand. When I entered, he turned his head slowly and looked at me, and he saw in my eyes that I knew, saw in my tears that I had discovered, saw in my expression that the door had finally been opened. His eyes filled with tears, those eyes that I had seen cry so many times from afar, hidden in the dark, now cried in front of me, without shame, without disguise. His body began to shake. His twisted mouth tried to form words, but only sobs came out. I went to him, sat on the edge of the bed, took his hand, the left hand, the one that still had movement, and squeezed it hard. I saw the room. "Arthur," I said. I saw Charlotte, and he cried. In that moment, I had a choice. I could have been angry. I could have yelled at him for shutting me out, for letting me live in doubt for 15 years. I had the right to be furious. But when I looked at his broken body and his tear-filled eyes, I saw that he had already punished himself enough. He didn't need a judge. He needed a witness to his pain. So I swallowed my pride. I swallowed my years of loneliness, and I chose love. I chose to be the bridge that would lead him out of that dark place. He wept like I had never seen a man weep before, like a child, without control, without shame. He was pouring out years of repressed pain, unlived grief, and stored suffering. He cried for the wife he lost, the daughter he buried, and the life he never got to live. And I stayed there holding his hand, crying along, sharing that pain that for so long he carried alone. In that moment, my dear, I understood something very important. I understood that Arthur's secret wasn't a secret of malice, wasn't betrayal, wasn't a crime, wasn't anything I had imagined. It was a secret of pain, a pain so great, so deep, so devastating, that he didn't know how to talk about it, didn't know how to share, didn't know how to let another person carry it too. And I also understood that my role there wasn't to judge, wasn't to demand, wasn't to ask why he didn't tell me before. My role was to welcome, was to forgive, was to help him finally do the grieving he had never managed to do. And that's what I did. That day, after Arthur stopped crying, we stayed in silence for a long time. Me sitting on the edge of the bed, holding his hand. Him lying down, looking at the ceiling, with red and swollen eyes. No words were needed. Sometimes silence says more than any conversation, and that silence said everything. Said that now I knew. Said that now we could start over. Said that that door which stayed closed for so long had finally been opened and would never close again. When the sun began to set and the room turned orange with the late afternoon light, Arthur squeezed my hand. It was a weak squeeze, because he was still very weak, but it was a squeeze full of meaning. I looked at him and saw that he was trying to speak. The twisted mouth moved slowly, forming words with difficulty, but with determination. I leaned close, putting my ear near his mouth, as I had done in the truck, on the way to the hospital, and this time I managed to understand what he said. Thank you. One word only, but a word that carried the weight of 15 years of silence. A word that meant more than 1,000 apologies, more than 1,000 explanations. Thank you for having discovered. Thank you for not having run away. Thank you for being there holding his hand even after knowing everything. I squeezed his hand back and said he didn't need to thank me. Said that I was his wife, that I had promised to stay by his side in joy and in sorrow, in sickness and in health, and that I was going to keep that promise until the end. The following days were of recovery, not just physical, but emotional too. Arthur was recovering from the stroke slowly, very slowly. Dr. Henry came every week to examine him, adjust the medicines, give instructions, said the recovery was going to be long, that maybe he would never go back to being as he was before, but that with care and patience he could have a dignified life. And while his body was recovering, his soul was too, because now he wasn't alone with that pain anymore. Now he had someone to share it with. And sharing pain, my dear, is the first step to being able to endure it. We started talking, not all at once, not in long conversations, because he still had difficulty speaking, but in pieces, in fragments, a little each day. He told me about Iris, about how they met, about how they fell in love, about the simple wedding in the little church in the village where she lived. Told me about the pregnancy, about the joy of knowing he was going to be a father, about the plans they made for the family they were building, and told me about the day everything fell apart. The birth was difficult. Back then there was no hospital nearby, no doctor available. There was only the midwife of the village, an old woman who had already helped bring hundreds of children into the world. But this time something went wrong. Iris bled too much. The midwife did everything she could, but it wasn't enough. The girl was born healthy, crying strong, full of life. But the mother was gone before even being able to hold her daughter in her arms. Arthur told me this with tears running down his face, said it was the worst day of his life, that he held Iris's hand while she departed, that he promised her he would take care of Charlotte, that he would raise their daughter with all the love in the world, and that he tried with all his might. He raised Charlotte alone in the first years, with the help of a neighbor who nursed the girl along with her own son, with the help of the community that brought food and clothes, with the help of God who gave him strength to get up every morning. He learned to change diapers, to bathe, to make mush, to sing lullabies, learned to be father and mother at the same time, and learned to love that girl more than he loved his own life. Charlotte was a joyful child. Arthur told me this with a sad smile on his face, said she laughed at everything, that she ran through the house making a mess, that she loved playing with the farm animals, said she had her mother's eyes and her father's stubborn way, said she was the light of his life, the reason to continue, the reason for every breath. And then came the pneumonia. It started suddenly, on a night in March of '58. Charlotte was fine during the day, playing, eating, laughing, but at night she woke up burning with fever. Arthur spent the whole night making compresses, giving tea, praying. When dawn broke, he went running to fetch the pharmacist in town, who was the closest thing to a doctor they had. The man came, examined the girl, and said it was pneumonia, a serious illness, very serious, that needed medicines he didn't have, treatments that didn't exist there. Arthur got in his truck and went to the big city to get medicine. It was hours of travel, of despair, of prayer. When he returned with the medicine in hand, it was already too late. The fever had consumed the girl. Charlotte had passed away, at 3.5 years of age, in the arms of the neighbor who was watching her while her father was away. He didn't get to say goodbye. When Arthur told me this, he cried so much I thought he wasn't going to be able to stop. I held him in my arms, like one holds a child, and let him cry. Cry everything he had kept for almost 20 years. Cry the guilt of not having been there at the time. Cry the anger of not having managed to save her. Cry the longing that never, at any moment, had diminished. After the funeral, he closed the room, locked the door, and kept the key. Told himself he was going to preserve everything just as it was, that he wasn't going to touch anything, that he was going to keep Charlotte's room intact forever, as if she were going to return, as if she were just traveling, and one day would appear at the door, asking to come in, asking to play with the rag doll. He knew it was madness, knew she wasn't going to return, but it was the only way he found to deal with the pain. It was the only way to keep her close, not to let her memory disappear, not to lose the last piece that had remained. And for almost 20 years, he visited that room, entered at dawn, when he thought no one would see, sat in the small rocking chair, held the rag doll, and talked to his daughter, told how the day had been, what had happened on the farm, how the weather was, told her he missed her, told her he loved her, told her that one day they would meet again, and cried all the tears he couldn't cry during the day, cried the pain he couldn't show anyone, cried alone, in the dark, embracing the memories of a girl the world had taken too soon. When he finished telling me all this, it was already night. The house was dark, only lit by the lamp on the nightstand. I was exhausted from so much crying, from so much emotion, from so much revelation. But I was also relieved to finally understand, to finally know the man I had married, to finally know the truth. I looked at Arthur and saw that he was also relieved. There was a peace on his face that I had never seen before, the peace of someone who finally shared a weight he carried alone, the peace of someone who was finally heard, was understood, was accepted. That night, I slept beside him, holding his hand, and for the first time in 15 years of marriage, I felt that we were truly together, not just sharing a house, a bed, a life, but sharing the soul, sharing the pain, sharing everything. The weeks passed, and Arthur got better slowly. He never fully recovered movement on the right side. His leg dragged. His arm was weak. His face remained a little twisted, but his speech came back almost entirely. And with the speech came more stories, more memories, more pieces of a past he had kept locked away for so long. He told me about the day Charlotte learned to walk, about the first word she spoke, which was Dada, about her second birthday, when he made a crooked cake and she got all smeared with frosting, about the nights she couldn't sleep, and he kept singing until she closed her eyes, about the way she ran to hug him when he arrived from work. Every story was a piece of his heart he was handing to me. And I received every piece with care, with affection, with respect, because I knew it wasn't easy for him, knew that every memory came accompanied by pain, but also knew that telling was important, that speaking was part of the healing, that sharing was the path to moving forward. About 2 months after the stroke, when Arthur was already managing to get out of bed and walk a little around the house with the help of a cane, he asked me for something. Asked me to take him to the 5th room. I hesitated. Asked if he was sure, if he was ready, if it wasn't going to be too painful. He said he needed to, that he needed to enter there again, but this time by day, this time with me, this time without hiding. I helped him walk down the hallway slowly, one step at a time. When we arrived at the door, he stopped and stood looking for a moment. The door was ajar, not locked, as I had left it since the day I entered. He took a deep breath, extended his hand, and pushed. The sunlight entered through the window I had left open. The room wasn't dark and damp like before anymore. It was illuminated, airy, alive. Dust still covered everything, but now you could see every detail with clarity. The crib, the wardrobe, the toys, the photos, everything bathed in the golden afternoon light. Arthur entered the room and walked slowly, looking around, as if he were seeing everything for the first time. Or maybe he was seeing it in a new way, without the guilt, without the weight, without the secret, only with the longing, only with the love, only with the memory of a daughter he would never forget. He went to the crib and picked up the rag doll, held it against his chest, closed his eyes, and stayed in silence for a while. I stood in the doorway, giving space, respecting the moment, and when he opened his eyes again, I saw that he was crying. But it was a different cry. It wasn't the desperate cry of before. It was a cry of farewell, a cry of acceptance, a cry of someone who was finally managing to let go. He turned to me and said with a choked but firm voice, "Genevieve, I want to transform this room." I asked what he meant. He explained. Said he didn't want this room to be a place of pain anymore, a place of secrets, a locked place. Said he wanted to transform it into a place of memory, of tribute, of love, a place where we could remember Charlotte and Iris, with affection, not with suffering, a place of light, not darkness. I agreed with all my heart. In the following weeks, we didn't just clean a room, we healed a wound. It was a holy work, my dear. With every layer of dust I wiped away, I felt like I was wiping away years of sorrow from Arthur's soul. I washed the curtains, letting the sunlight bleach out the gloom. I scrubbed the floor until the wood shone like new, scrubbing away the guilt, scrubbing away the silence. Arthur sat there and watched me. And for the first time, he wasn't guarding the memory like a jailer. He was sharing it like a treasure. We organized Charlotte's clothes in a beautiful box, lined with fabric, which was kept in the wardrobe. We put the photos in new frames and arranged them on a shelf, like an altar of memories. In the center of the room, where the crib used to be, we put a small table with a white lace tablecloth. On top of the table, we placed an image of Our Lady, a vase with flowers from the garden, and the photos of Iris and Charlotte side by side. It was an oratory, a sacred place, a place to remember, to pray, to give thanks for the lives of those two people who had been so important. When we finished, Arthur stood in the doorway, looking at the transformed room, and he smiled. For the first time since I had known him, I saw a real smile on his face, a smile that reached his eyes, that illuminated that expression, that warmed the heart of whoever saw it. He said that Iris would like it, that Charlotte would like it, that now they had a beautiful place to live in his memory. No longer a dark and locked room, but a room of light and love. It's a beautiful reminder that shared sorrow is lighter to carry. By opening that door, they didn't lose the past. They finally made room for a future together. From that day on, we visited the room together. Every afternoon, after lunch, we went there, lit a candle, prayed a Lord's Prayer, and stayed in silence for a few minutes. Sometimes, Arthur told another story, another memory that had returned. Sometimes we just stood there holding hands, looking at the photos, feeling the presence of those two souls that we knew were nearby. The silence in our house changed, too. Before, it was a heavy silence, full of unspoken words and hidden walls. It was a silence that separated us. But now? Now it was a comfortable silence. It was the silence of two people who didn't need words to understand each other. We could sit on the porch for hours, just listening to the wind in the cornfields, and I no longer wondered where his mind was. I knew, and he knew I knew. We weren't just husband and wife anymore. We were partners in keeping a memory alive. The wall was gone. The years passed. 78, 79, 80. Arthur never recovered completely from the stroke, but managed to live with dignity. Walked with a cane, spoke with a little difficulty, needed help for some things, but was alive, was present, was for the first time in a long time, at peace. Our relationship changed after all that. We became closer, more intimate, more connected. He began to talk more, to share more, to demonstrate more. He wasn't a man of grand gestures, never was. But the small gestures appeared. A caress on the hand, a lingering look, a thank you whispered before sleeping. Small things that meant the world to me. I learned to love him in a different way. No longer the anxious love of a young bride wanting to please, but the mature love of a woman who knew the man entirely, with all the wounds, with all the scars, with all the pains, a love that had passed through fire and come out stronger. In 1985, 8 years after the stroke, Arthur had a relapse. Another stroke, this one stronger than the first. The doctors said there wasn't much to do, that it was a matter of time. I brought him home. I didn't want him to die in the hospital alone, surrounded by strangers. I wanted him to die in his house, in his bed, with the people he loved nearby. In the last days, he stayed mostly sleeping, but in the moments he woke up, he held my hand and looked at me with those eyes I had learned to read so well. And I knew what he wanted to say, even without words. Knew he was thanking me, knew he was saying goodbye, knew he was ready to go. On the last night, I was sitting beside his bed, holding his hand, as always. He opened his eyes and looked at me, and with a voice so weak I almost didn't hear, he said their names, Iris, Charlotte, and then said mine, Genevieve, and smiled. That smile I had seen for the first time when we transformed the room, the smile of peace, the smile of someone who is ready. I squeezed his hand and said everything was okay, that he could go, that Iris and Charlotte were waiting for him, that I was going to be fine, that I was going to take care of everything. He closed his eyes, his breathing became slower, more spaced out, and in a moment I can't pinpoint exactly when it was, the breathing stopped and he was gone. I stayed there holding his hand for a long time after, crying, yes, but not from despair, from gratitude. Gratitude for having had him in my life. Gratitude for having discovered the truth. Gratitude for having had the chance to help him heal. Gratitude for having loved and having been loved, even if in a crooked way, even if in a difficult way, even if in a way that took years to complete. After the funeral, I returned home and went to the room we had transformed together, lit a candle, prayed a prayer, and put a photo of Arthur together with the photos of Iris and Charlotte. Now they were together again, the complete family, united in memory, united in love, united forever. I continued living in that house for many years, continued visiting that room every afternoon, continued talking to them, telling how my life was, asking for protection, giving thanks for everything. That room, which one day was a place of pain, became the most sacred place in the house, the place where I found peace, the place where I felt I was never alone. Today I am 82 years old. I have lived longer than most people of my generation. I have gone through a lot, have seen much change, have learned many lessons, But the greatest lesson of all, I learned with Arthur. I learned that the pain we keep alone gets bigger, and the pain we share gets smaller. I learned that secrets protect no one, only hurt. I learned that true love is that which welcomes the whole person with all the wounds, with all the scars. And I also learned that it is never too late to heal. Arthur spent almost 20 years carrying that pain alone. But in the last 8 years of his life, he managed to do the grieving he had never done. Managed to talk about the wife and daughter he lost. Managed to cry in front of another person without shame. Managed to transform a room of darkness into a room of light. It is never too late, my dear. It is never too late to open the doors we keep locked. If you are watching this video and have some pain stored away, some secret that is consuming you, some door you keep closed for too long, I want to tell you one thing. Please, listen to this old woman. Do not let your pain become your master. Do not lock yourself in a room of your own making. Open that door. Share that burden. Find someone, a friend, a partner, a pastor, and let the light in. Grief is a heavy stone, my darlings. Too heavy for one person to carry alone. But when you share it, it becomes a bridge. It can be terrifying to show your wounds, but I promise you, on the other side of that fear is not judgment. On the other side is freedom. On the other side is peace. Arthur asked for my forgiveness that day at the hospital. Asked forgiveness for having hidden that secret for so many years, but I told him there was nothing to forgive. Because I understood that he didn't hide it out of malice. Hid it because he didn't know how to do it differently. Hid it because the pain was too big. Hid it because it was the only way he found to survive. And I also understood that sometimes we need help to open the doors we locked ourselves. Arthur might never have managed to open that door alone. Needed the stroke, needed the weakness of the body, needed to almost die to finally let me in. But I entered, and when I entered, everything changed. So, if you know someone who is carrying a weight, who is keeping a secret, who is suffering in silence, extend your hand, offer your shoulder, show that you are there, ready to listen, ready to welcome, ready to help carry. Sometimes that's all the person needs. Knowing they are not alone, knowing they have someone by their side, knowing the door can be opened without the world collapsing. Please, honey, don't let secrets turn into cold stone walls within your own families. If this old woman's story can help just one of you find the courage to open your heart, then my 15 years of waiting were worth it. Love each other while you still can, okay? So, that is the whole story of my life and that fateful 5th bedroom. 15 years of living in suspicion, decades of carrying the weight of pain, all to learn a priceless lesson about healing and unconditional love. My dears, Grandma Genevieve truly hopes that these words have touched a special place in your hearts. If you felt a connection, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Help me spread this story. Who knows? It might just be the key that helps someone out there escape their own personal prison. And I am so curious to know, where in this big wide world are you sitting and listening to my story? Please write the name of your city down below. I promise I will read every single comment. Knowing that you are out there following along is the greatest joy for this old woman. May God bless each and every one of you. I pray that those who are struggling find strength, and those who are afraid find the courage to open the door to their hearts. Please accept my love, and may peace be with us all. Grandma Genevieve loves you very much.